Day after day, week after week, the office staff hears it. It's the sound of hammers driving nails in. It's the sound of drills spinning rapidly. It's that sound of heavy machinery making its way around and even in the building at times with that really loud beeping sound. It's workers who are trying to be heard, so they yell over all the noise. It's the door alarm. The door alarm that beeps every few minutes, all day, every day, because there are workers going in and out and in and out over and over. We hear it all the time. And every day I'm reminded of the fact that there's construction going on here. And with that construction comes a lot of excitement. Because as you think about what that means that there's growth taking place. That means that there's vision that is taking place. We think about the opportunity that we have in the coming days, weeks, months, and years to do great good for the glory of God. But I also understand that with construction and the excitement, there is also the disruption. And there's also the inconvenience that comes. And there's also the times where there's the discomfort. And there have been times the last few weeks where it's been a little cold in the auditorium. And unless you get here really early, it's hard to sometimes find a seat. And there's a lot about this construction that, yes, it's exciting, but man, it's also a little disruptive and uncomfortable at times. And as I think about that, I think about several years ago, about 10 years ago now, the last building project that I was a part of. And I remember all the excitement that went around that, but I also remember that there were several months that was the biggest pain. Because for several months, we couldn't use our auditorium. We had to meet in our fellowship hall, which was much smaller. And because it was much smaller and we were a rather large congregation, we had to go from one service to two morning services. So that meant that you didn't get to see everybody for several months. We were split up. I remember, not only that, but we had pews. I know we don't have pews here, but there we had pews. And, pews aren't the most comfortable thing, but they are padded, most pews anyway, right? And so we had these padded pews, but when we got moved to the fellowship hall, we had to sit on the little white chairs that we have down in some of the classrooms and the ones that we use back, well, not really back here anymore, but we used to use back here for meals and stuff. We had to sit in those. So it was very disruptive, it was inconvenient, and it was very uncomfortable. But when it finally came together, I would say it was worth it. I think if you were to go and to talk to those members who were there through that whole process and experience the inconvenience and the disruption, and you were to ask them, hey, was it worth it? I think they would say it was absolutely worth it. Because the end result and what we could do now is much greater than what we could do before. And that is our hope and our prayer through this building expansion that we're doing. That I want all of us to understand that right now, while it's inconvenient and right now, while it's not the most comfortable and it's hard to find a seat and maybe it's cold in the auditorium, I want you to understand that in the end, when it's all done, it will be worth it. It's going to be worth it. And that is our hope and that is our prayer. And so this morning, as I stand before you, I have the opportunity today to present to you our congregational theme for the year. And as we're thinking about that theme this year and thinking about all the construction that would be taking place, the theme that we have settled on this year is Rise Up and Build. Rise up and build. That's what we want to do. It comes from Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse number 18. And the challenge for all of us this year is that we will rise up and build our homes. that we'll rise up and build our families, that we will rise up and build our influence, that we will rise up and build build up the people around us, that we will rise up and build the kingdom of God, His church. Our hope and our prayer, the challenge for all of us is let's rise up and let's build. And that's what we're going to be talking about this year. And so you're going to hear me say over and over throughout this year that we will rise up and build. But as you think about that idea of rising up and building, I want you to understand that it doesn't start with the building. You don't just jump into construction, so to speak. In fact, before any blueprints are ever drawn, before any hammer is ever swung, there has to be a burden in someone's heart. Someone has to be moved to action. And that's what happened when it came to our decision here. A little more than 2 years ago, the shepherds and the leadership team got together and we talked about the future of Walter Hill and what Walter Hill would look like and what Walter Hill could do and what we could be in this community and what we could do for the glory of God. And after much discussion and much prayer, it was decided that the best course of action for us is to expand our facilities, so that we can reach more people for Jesus, so that we can do more good in this community, so that we can do it not for our glory, but so that we could do it for the glory of God. And it came that way, it came to be because someone's heart, the shepherds, was moved to action. See, before any construction ever takes place, your heart has to be moved. You have to see something that isn't right, maybe something that isn't the way it should be, or maybe it's no longer working the way it should work, and say, you know what, we're going to do something about that. And that's what was decided for us. That's what was decided before we jumped into this. And as I was reflecting on that and thinking about this year and thinking about this theme, I'm reminded of Nehemiah. And if you know Nehemiah, then you probably associate Nehemiah with the rebuilding of the walls around Jerusalem. And while, yes, Nehemiah did help to lead the people in the rebuilding of the walls, I want you to understand that when it comes to his story doesn't start with this plan. It doesn't start with this project. It doesn't start with this, hey, call to action. Hey, let's rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. That's not where it starts. It really starts with the story of a man's heart that was broken. A man's heart who gets this report that touches him and breaks him. See, if you know anything about Nehemiah, then you know Nehemiah he wasn't a prophet, he wasn't a priest, he wasn't a king. He was just an ordinary man. But he was an ordinary man who had a pretty important job, an influential position, we might say. We find out in Nehemiah chapter 1 and verse 11 that he was cupbearer to the king. Now, I know you hear that and you think, well, big deal. I mean, basically he was a servant. What's the big deal about that? Well, the big deal about that was, in that day and time, the cupbearer to the king was a position of honor. And it was a position of honor because kings had to deal with assassinations, assassination attempts. And so one of the methods that people would use to assassinate a king was they would poison them. That was a common method in that culture. And so the cupbearer's position was an important position because he was the individual who would select the wine the king would drink. He would serve it to the king. And before he would give it to him, he would even taste it to prove that, hey, it's not poisoned. That's the position of honor. That was a position that really, the king and his cupbearer, that was a position that required a lot of trust. Because you might say the life of the king in some extent was in the hands of his cupbearer. And that's who Nehemiah is. He's the cupbearer to the king, and he lives in the capital of the Persian Empire of Susa, 1,000 miles away from the city of Jerusalem. But that's where our story begins in Nehemiah chapter 1. Beginning in verse 2, notice what happens. It says that Hananiah, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and who had survived the exile concerning Jerusalem. Now, as we begin, I want you to understand, here Nehemiah is, and he's in this place thousands of miles away, 1,000 miles away from Jerusalem. And some men from Judah come, and they don't say anything to Nehemiah. Nehemiah is the one who prompts the question here. He's the one that asked this question. He says, I want to know about the people who returned from exile, those who survived. I want to know about the city of Jerusalem. And if you remember the story of the Old Testament and the history of God's people, then you'll remember that Nebuchadnezzar went in at this point, about 150 years prior, and destroyed the city of Jerusalem, tore down the city walls. The people were taken into captivity, and they served in captivity for 70 years. But after that 70 years, God allowed 3 different waves of people to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild. He allowed what they were called the remnant of the faithful who got to return home. And so the question that Nehemiah has is, how's it going back home? How's it going in Jerusalem? And look at verse 3, the response that he's given. It says, and they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates are destroyed by fire. See, Nehemiah asked this question, and Nehemiah receives this report that the remnant that had returned, well, there's 2 things. They're in trouble and shame. They're in trouble because the city walls and the gates of the city have been destroyed. Now, again, you read that and maybe you think about, fences and gates in our culture today. Like a lot of you may have a gate around your house, or at least the back part of your house, your backyard. We have one of those at our house, a little gate. But here's the deal. That gate, it's just for looks and to keep the dogs in. Because if you wanted to get into my backyard, you could open the gate and walk in. If you wanted to get into my backyard, you could jump the fence. I mean, it's not that big. And so for us, they're more decorative purposes, so to speak. But in that culture, well, they're a lot bigger. They were taller, they were thicker, and they were built to fortify a city. They were built to protect the city from outside forces, to protect the city from enemies. So if your city didn't have walls, if the gates of the city would have been torn down, then that would mean that you had no protection. That's where the trouble comes in. You can't be protected. Anybody can come in as they want to, and they can cause great harm to you and to the citizens of your city. But he says there's also shame. And the shame is the fact that in that day and time, people associated the condition of the walls of the city with the strength of the city's God. And so if your walls were broken down, if they were in shambles, so to speak, then that reflected poorly on your God. And so for the condition of Jerusalem at this time, with the city walls being broken down and the gates being burned, yes, that was troublesome for the people. But that was also a poor reflection of God Almighty. It brought reproach upon God. And so Nehemiah asks this question, he learns, and I want you to notice verse 4. He says, as soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for many days. Nehemiah receives this report. Hey, the people who've returned the city, it's in trouble. It's in shame. The walls have been broken down. And immediately the reaction or the response that you get from Nehemiah is, Nehemiah responds with this, or reacts with this burdened heart. His heart is burdened about what he hears. We might say it this way, his heart is broken because of the news that he just received. You ever had your heart broken? I'm not just talking about like love life, right? You're in grade school, high school, and maybe, you date someone and you break up and your heart gets broken. I'm talking about the things around you that you see. You see things in life, you hear reports of things, maybe you watch the news, and immediately you see that, and you know what? It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to see what's going on, in other countries with war. It breaks my heart to see that there are children who live and people who live in poverty. It breaks my heart. You fill in the blank. Nehemiah gets this report and he's burdened. And there's an important point that I want you to see, because so many times when we think about Nehemiah, we automatically go to the wall. Nehemiah rebuilt the wall. Nehemiah rebuilt the wall. That's what Nehemiah did. But what Nehemiah teaches us is that there has to be a burden before there are blueprints. Before you can rebuild, before you jump into something, you need to be troubled about something. You need to have a heart that is burdened. And that's where Nehemiah is. He's burdened about what he hears. But he's not just burdened. Because listen, having a burden, getting your heart broken over something, man, that breaks my heart to hear about what that person's going through. That's one thing. But having a heart that's burdened isn't enough. The question is what will you do about that burden? What will you do about that heartbreak? And so look at the end of verse 4. Nehemiah, he hears these words. He says, I sat down and I wept and I mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. See, Nehemiah receives this report about the trouble and the shame of Jerusalem because of what has happened to the city. And his reaction is he's troubled. He's burdened about that report. But he doesn't stop there. Notice his response. His response is he begins to pray. I fasted and I prayed to God for days. Verse 6 tells us he did it day and night. He was so troubled about what he heard that before he jumped into action, before he said, hey, let's go rebuild the walls. And listen, Nehemiah knew what he wanted to do. I want to go back and help. I want to do something. But before he ever did anything, he dropped to his knees and he prayed. He took his troubles and the burden that he felt in his heart, he took it before the throne of God. And as you read beginning in verse 5, and because of time, we're not going to look at verses 5 through 10, but he begins to pray. And in that prayer, he begins by acknowledging who God is and how God is this great and awesome God. And then he reflects on the sin of the people, the nation of Israel, of Judah. Hey, we failed you. We have sinned. He includes himself in this. I've done this as well. And then he talks to the people or to God. He reminds God, hey, remember the promise that you made, the promise even to Moses, hey, that if the people are faithful, if the people return to you, then you'll return to them, that you will bless them. But then you get to verse 11. And verse 11 is really the thrust of the prayer here. Look what he says in verse 11. He says, O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. See, as Nehemiah sets the stage for his prayer, he finally gets to, hey, here's the heart of the prayer. Here's what I want you to do. God, I want you to be attentive to the prayer of your servant, talking about himself, but also to the prayer of your servants who delight in your name. Hey, I'm not going to be the only one praying about this. We're all going to pray about this. And here's what we're asking. We are asking that you grant your servant success and mercy as he goes before this man. Now, this man, we find out, is the king. That's the prayer he's asking God for. He's praying to God, and he's praying for an opportunity. God, I want an opportunity to go before the king, to make my pitch, so to speak, to go back and to rebuild. And God, I want success. I want you to open this door and grant me this opportunity so that I can go back home and rebuild. Now, this response from Nehemiah, to me, is intriguing because most scholars assume that maybe Nehemiah has never been to Jerusalem. That Nehemiah may have been born in captivity and found his way through captivity, and eventually found himself in the Persian Empire. And yet here he is. He's 1,000 miles away. He's living in the comfort of the palace of the most important king in the world at this time. And yet he hears about what's going on in Jerusalem. And he's burdened. His heart breaks. And I don't know about you. I don't know where you're from. I'm from a little small town, about an hour from here or so. And well, actually about an hour and a half, I guess, hour and 40 minutes from here. And I haven't been back to my hometown in over a year. My grandmother passed away a little over a year ago, and a few weeks ago we went back, one trip back because my parents had their 50th wedding anniversary, so we did it in our hometown. But that's the only time I've been back in the last 13, 14 months. And to be honest, I don't know when I'll go back. But here's the thing. I love my hometown. I'm thankful that I was raised in that hometown, and I want that my hometown to succeed. I want my hometown to be blessed. I want good things to happen. And when I hear of bad things happening in my hometown, even though I don't live there anymore, guess what? It breaks my heart. Because that's my hometown. That's where I'm from. And here Nehemiah is, and he learned, so to speak, about his hometown, where his people are from, and he's burdened and he's troubled. And so before he acts, he drops to his knees and he begins to pray to God, and he says, God, I want you to give me this opportunity. I want you to grant me success as I go before the king. And here's what's interesting. Verse 6 tells us that he prayed for many days, day and night. But if you look at chapter 1, verse 1, he receives this report in the month of Kislev. But when chapter 2 opens, chapter 2 says that it's in the month of Nisan. So he hears about it in Kislev, which is the 9th month. But he's going to go before the king in Nisan, which is the 1st month. And that's not there just to fill words on a page. That's there to indicate something to us. That Nehemiah spent 4 months, or almost 4 months, burdened by the news and praying for an opportunity. Can you imagine being so troubled and so burdened by something that you didn't just pray about it once or twice, but that you prayed over and over and over, day after day, night after night? That's where Nehemiah was. He's praying and asking God for this opportunity. And so you get to verse 1, the middle of verse 1 there, and it tells us, so I took up wine and I gave it to the king. I had not been sad in the presence of the king. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Then I was very much afraid. See, for 4 months, Nehemiah prays about this situation until one day he goes in to serve the king, to do his job, so to speak. And the Bible says that Nehemiah was sad. And apparently he was sad in such a way that the king took notice. And this is what's interesting about that. For 4 months, this has been on his heart. But for 4 months, as he's entered into the presence of the king, he's tried to keep his composure until the time was right. And at the right time, when he was ready to approach the king, after praying for 4 months about the situation, he goes in, and it's pretty obvious he's down in the dumps. And the king says, hey, what's wrong? You're sad, and it's not because you're sick. There's something with your heart. You're heartbroken, Nehemiah. And that phrase, I was very much afraid. That phrase is important. Because to be sad in the presence of the king was a very dangerous thing. It could be seen as being disloyal or dishonoring of the king. And so when Nehemiah gets there, and all of a sudden the moment is here, I've been praying about this moment, and I'm going to approach the king, and he shows his heart. He wears his heart on his sleeve, so to speak. And the king takes notice. He's afraid. So verse 3 says, I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city in the place of my father's graves lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? King, you want to know why I'm sad? I have every right to be sad because my hometown, the place where my people are from, it's in ruins. And King, that's breaking my heart. That's why I'm sad. In verse 4, so the king said to me, what are you requesting? This is the moment that Nehemiah has been waiting for. For 4 months, he has prayed for this opportunity. I want to be able to have success before this man, the king, when I go before him. He's now before the king. The king says, "What are you asking, Nehemiah?" And before Nehemiah ever says a word, notice what he does. "So I prayed to the God of heaven." Nehemiah has been praying for 4 months for this moment. And when the moment finally arrives, Nehemiah repeated his prayer. He repeated this prayer for the opportunity and for the moment. And I think he teaches us something very important about prayer. That prayer is not like a one-time thing. It's not something that we stop once the door opens, but that we continue to pray for the opportunities that God will bless us with. Here we are, and we've got this building, and it's coming up, and we've been praying about that, and eventually it's going to be completed in the next few months. And when it is, will we stop praying? Or will we keep repeating our prayer, "God, give us opportunity. God, open the door." Nehemiah is here in this moment. He's been praying for 4 months, but he repeats his prayer. And you get to verse 5, and the king's he's gonna tell the king what he wants to do. "King, I'm gonna go back to Judah. I want to rebuild the city." And the king's gonna ask, "How long are you gonna be gone?" He's gonna give him a period of time. And so the king's gonna say, "Okay, you can go." And Nehemiah's gonna push it a little bit further and say, "Well, will you give me some letters so that I can pass?" Kind of like a military escort. And I need some lumber from the king's forest so that I can rebuild. And he makes these requests of the king. And you get to verse 8. And verse 8 tells us that when the king heard these words, the king granted me what I asked. The king did the very thing that Nehemiah has been praying about for 4 months. But notice the last part. Nehemiah says, "For the good hand of my God was upon me." Nehemiah understood something very important. That the king granted his request not because of who Nehemiah was, but because of who God is. Nehemiah got the answer that he wanted because God had his hand in it. You see, when I think about Nehemiah and I think about he's going to rebuild the wall, and that's so important, but he teaches us this idea that before there's a wall to rebuild, before you start that construction, you have to have a burden on your heart. You have to be troubled about something. Something needs to change. Something needs to be done. Action has to be taken. And Nehemiah teaches us that when you are burdened and when you are prayerful, God will open doors of opportunity. That when I am burdened about something, someone, some situation, and I'm prayerful, God's going to open doors. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to work out the way that I want it to. It's not always going to happen the way I plan for it to. There are going to be people maybe in my life that I want to bring to the Lord, or I want to come back to the Lord, and I'm troubled by that, and I'm praying about that. And God may give me a door of opportunity where I can walk through it and I can talk about Jesus. I can talk to them about coming back to the Lord, and they may choose to say no. They may choose not to respond in a positive way, but God's still going to give me that door of opportunity. And when I think about the story of Nehemiah, and I think about this man and this burden that was on his heart, I know the end. I know what he says in Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 18 when he tells the people, "Hey, let's rise up and build." And I know that they're going to complete that project. But before he builds, he has a burden. Before he builds, he spends time praying about it, asking God to bless it, asking God for the opportunity for it to be successful. And as I think about that as we lead into this new year with this theme of rise up and build, I think the question that I want all of us to consider this morning is, who in our life needs the hope of Jesus? Who is it in your life? Maybe there's a coworker in your life. And you know what? They're not a Christian. They don't walk with God. They don't live the Christian life. They don't even know Jesus. And maybe that troubles you. Maybe you're burdened by that. And maybe you want to do something about it. Might I suggest to you, you start praying about it. You start praying and asking God to give you an opportunity to say something to that person to help bring them to Jesus. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe there's a family member in your life who doesn't know Jesus, or maybe who knew Jesus but has left the faith, so to speak, and you're burdened by that. Oh, and you're praying to God by that. Might I suggest to you, pray and ask God for a door of opportunity. God, give me an opportunity to say something about you. Give me a door of opportunity to plant a seed to help bring them to you or back to you. Maybe there's a friend in your life, somebody that you've known your whole life. And they know you're a disciple of Jesus, but they're not. And you know that. And maybe you're burdened by that, but maybe you've never done anything about it. And maybe what you need to do is start praying and saying, God, give me a door of opportunity. Give me an opportunity to say something about you. I think so much. There's a song we used to sing. I know I've mentioned this before. I don't know that we've sang it really here at Walter Hill much, but we used to sing it when I was growing up, called You Never Mentioned Him to Me. And every time I used to sing that song, it used to terrify me. Because I know there have been people in my life who don't know Jesus. And they know I know him. And I know they don't know him. And yet I never said anything. I never shared the gospel with them. I never tried. God gave me doors of opportunity. I just never took them. And I think about that, and I think I'm probably not the only one to feel that way. I'd say most of us probably felt that way. And so as we think about this new year and we think about this theme of rising up and building, I want us to think about someone in our life who needs the hope of Jesus. And I don't want you to pick out 10 people. This week, I want you to focus on one person. And I want you to think about that person, write their name where you will see it on a regular basis every day, wherever that might be. And I want you every day this week to pray. And I want you to ask God, give me an opportunity to help teach them about you. Give me an opportunity to say something that can bring them in to your family. God, give me an opportunity to rise up and to build. That's what we want to do this year. Not so we can put a number on the back wall and say, hey, look at us. It's not about the number. It's about the soul. It's about people dying lost without Jesus as their Savior. And so this year, the challenge for us is to rise up and build. But brethren, before we ever build, before we ever get to that point where we can rise up and build, we have to have a burden on our hearts and a prayer on our lips. God, give me an opportunity to reach this person for you. If you're here this morning and maybe you're not a Christian, and maybe this morning you need to pray the prayer that Nehemiah prayed. You need to confess the sins that you've committed in your life. You need to turn to Jesus and be buried in the waters of baptism for the forgiveness of your sins. There's no greater opportunity than today to do that. And if you haven't done that, we want to assist you with that today. But I know so many of you here, you have taken that step. You gave your life to Jesus and been buried with him a long time ago. But maybe as you reflect on your life this morning, maybe you realize, hey, I've got sin in my life, and I need to confess that sin and make things right. And we're going to have a shepherd down front. We want to pray with you and for you, if that be your need this morning. Or maybe this morning, there's someone on your heart, and you are troubled and burdened by the fact that person, if they were to die today, you know they would be eternally lost. And maybe you're sitting here today saying, you know what, I need to do what Nehemiah did. I need to be burdened about this situation, and I need to go before God in prayer day and night, asking God to give me the opportunity so that I can take action. We want to pray with you and for you this morning if that be your need. Or maybe today you're just having struggles and you want your family here at Walter Hill to pray for you. If that's the case, we'd love to do that for you. because that's what family does. We're going to sing this song of encouragement this morning, and if you have any need whatsoever, we invite you to come as together we stand and sing.